I keep thinking you'll come back to me.
1.3 is our introduction into integers. They start out 1.3 by introducing the number line. And any real number can be placed on a number line. If you ever look at a number line, you start with 0 in the middle, and then as you move up to the right, the numbers increase in size. But as you go backwards, we run into our negative numbers. And these are our negative integers. For the sake of 1.3, in the rest of chapter 1, we're only going to be talking about the integers, that is whole numbers, and the negative whole numbers. So we won't talk about fractions or anything like that, but any real number can be placed on the number line. They have a section where they talk about inequality. Our inequality symbols look like this. This is the less than symbol. This is the greater than symbol. This is the less than or equal. And then we have greater than or equal. And they will give you some numbers, let's say 0 and -5, and they'll ask you which one of these inequalities will fit in between these numbers. Now, if you remember from elementary, not elementary, maybe middle school, they always say that the alligator eats the bigger number. So the symbol is always going to open up at the bigger number. So if you look at 0 and -5, 0 is actually the bigger number because negative is further to the left on the number line than 0. So the bigger number in this case is 0. You would rather have $0 than be in debt $5. Let's say if I had 3 and -7. The 3 is the bigger number, so this is the inequality that I will put in that in between these two numbers. Let's say I have -7 and -3. So at first glance you would think 7 would be the bigger number, but these are both negative numbers, so you got to almost think backwards. The bigger number is actually the -3, so you're going to open up at the -3. The next part talks about absolute value, if I can spell. Absolute value. The official definition of absolute value is the distance from 0. So if I had my number line here, and let's say I have 0 in the middle, I could go in the right direction and put a 7 here, or I can go in the left direction and put a -7 here. This is how they would appear on the number line. Now, if you see the distance between 0 and 7, this is 7 units. From 0 to 7, that is 7 units. And also, if you look backwards from 0 to -7, it is also 7 units. So when you're talking about absolute value, this is the symbol you'll see for absolute value. There'll be these straight bars around the number. So this is asking you, what is the absolute value of 7? The absolute value of 7 is going to be 7, because 7 is 7 units away from 0. Remember the definition, distance from 0. So let's say I had the absolute value of -7. How many units is -7 away from 0? 7. So it's always going to be a positive number. Always going to be a positive number when you're talking about absolute value. So the absolute value of 13 is 13. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. It's always going to be the positive form. Don't think the opposite. Just think it's always the positive number. Now, this can be confused with opposite. So, you may see something that looks like this. Negative, negative, A. So you have a negative on the outside and you have a negative inside the parentheses. When you bring these two negatives together, it's going to make a positive. So this is actually equal to a positive A. Another way that you can look at this is think this negative sign is like saying the opposite of negative A. Now the opposite of negative A is a positive A. And this is another way that you can look at the negative sign that's in front of the parentheses. You're always doing the opposite of what's inside the parentheses. So if I had negative A, the opposite of A is negative A. So all these variables, let's put numbers into this to make it a little bit more friendlier. If I had the opposite of negative 7, this is going to be positive 7. Negative, negative come together, positive. Let's say if I had the opposite of negative 4. Negative, negative comes together, this is positive 4. Let's say if I had negative and then a positive 5 inside the parentheses. The opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. So this negative doesn't go away. It still remains a negative 5. So let's look at a few more examples. Let's say if I had these examples here. I'm just going to list a bunch of examples and mix them up with absolute value. Okay. So for this first one here, we have the opposite of negative 3. These two negatives come together, make it positive, so this is positive 3 is your answer for this one. Let's look at the second one. The opposite of positive 4, there's not two negatives here, so this turns into a negative 4. The absolute value of negative 12, remember absolute value means distance from 0, so this is always going to be positive. The fourth one, again, this is the absolute value of negative 8, that turns into a positive. And then lastly, the absolute value of 5, always going to be positive. Let's say you see something like this, negative, negative 2. And these are absolute value symbols here. In this case, the two negatives do not come together and make it positive, because you have to actually do the absolute value first. The absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. And then you tag the negative back to the front. So let me write this out. You can ignore the negative sign that's in front. So the absolute value of negative 2 is going to be positive 2. But then there's a negative in the front that I need to continue to leave in the front of the number. So you need to take the absolute value first. So let's say if I had negative 8. So absolute value of negative 8 is positive 8. But then I tag this negative that's in the front back in front of the number. It's almost like you're multiplying by a negative 1. So what about negative positive 1?
I keep thinking